The year is 2024 and the state of freedom around the world is very serious. Authoritarian regimes are tightening their grip, cracking down on dissent, and stripping away the basic rights and liberties of their citizens. In this video, we'll take a sobering look at the top 10 freedom-unfriendly countries in 2024, where the light of democracy is flickering and being replaced by the darkness of oppression. Number 10. Cuba. Once hailed as a beacon of socialism, this island nation has become a prison for its own people. The communist government, led by the iron-fisted rule of the Castro dynasty, has an iron grip on power that it refuses to relinquish. With a Freedom House score of just 13 out of 100, civil liberties and political rights in Cuba are severely restricted. The government controls the media, censors the internet, and tolerates little to no opposition. Over 130 political prisoners languish in Cuba's jails, their only crime being the desire for a free and open society. Despite some economic reforms in recent years, the average Cuban still struggles to make ends meet, with a GDP per capita of just $8,822 in 2023. The dream of a prosperous, democratic Cuba remains painfully out of reach for its long-suffering people. Number 9. Venezuela, a country that has descended into a full-blown humanitarian crisis under the authoritarian rule of President Nicolas Maduro. With a Freedom House score of 16 out of 100, Venezuela is a place where free speech, free press, and free elections are little more than empty promises. The government cracks down mercilessly on any form of political dissent, with thousands of opposition activists and critics imprisoned or exiled. The economic situation is nothing short of catastrophic, with hyperinflation ravaging the country and leaving millions struggling to afford basic necessities. In 2023, the inflation rate hit a staggering 686%, and the GDP per capita plummeted to just $1,700. The human toll has been devastating, with over 7 million Venezuelans forced to flee the country as refugees and migrants, seeking refuge from the oppression and deprivation of Maduro's regime. Venezuela's descent into authoritarianism and economic ruin stands as a stark warning to the world about the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of abandoning democratic principles. Number 8. Belarus, often referred to as Europe's last dictatorship. Under the iron-fisted rule of President Alexander Lukashenko, this former Soviet republic has become a bastion of repression and intolerance. With a Freedom House score of just 8 out of 100, Belarus is a place where freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and free and fair elections are relics of the past. In the aftermath of the disputed 2020 presidential election, the government unleashed a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, with over 30,000 arrests and widespread reports of police violence and torture. The regime's stranglehold on the media is equally severe, with the Press Freedom Index ranking Belarus a dismal 153rd out of 180 countries in 2023. The country's political prisoners have become a symbol of the regime's ruthlessness, with over 1,500 individuals languishing in jails for the crime of daring to challenge Lukashenko's rule. Belarus has become a frozen conflict, a place where the aspirations of its people for freedom and democracy have been brutally extinguished by a government that clings to power at all costs. Number 7. Iran, a country that has long been synonymous with human rights abuses and the suppression of individual liberties. With a Freedom House score of just 14 out of 100, Iran is a place where the theocratic regime of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rules with an iron fist. Freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly are all severely curtailed in Iran. The government maintains a tight grip on the media, routinely shutting down the internet during periods of unrest, and imprisoning journalists and dissidents who dare to challenge the regime's narratives. In 2023 alone, the country saw over 250 executions, many of them political prisoners. The situation for women in Iran is particularly dire, with deeply entrenched gender-based discrimination and a lack of basic rights. The government's crackdown on protest movements, such as the 2022 Women, Life, Freedom uprising, has been ruthless and unforgiving. Iran's dismal human rights record and its unwavering commitment to maintaining its authoritarian grip on power have made it a pariah on the global stage. Number 6. Saudi Arabia, a country that has long been criticized for its egregious human rights abuses and lack of political freedoms. With a Freedom House score of just 7 out of 100, Saudi Arabia is a place where the absolute monarchy of the House of Saud reigns supreme, with little tolerance for dissent or calls for reform. The government's crackdown on freedom of expression has been particularly severe, with at least 26 journalists imprisoned in 2023 alone. The murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 sent shockwaves around the world and highlighted the regime's willingness to silence its critics through the most brutal means. Women's rights in Saudi Arabia, while improving in recent years, remain severely restricted. The country's Gender Inequality Index score of 0.257 in 2023 reflects the deeply entrenched patriarchal structures that continue to oppress half the population. And with over 180 executions carried out in 2023, the Saudi regime has demonstrated a chilling disregard for the sanctity of human life. Number 5. China, a country that has become increasingly authoritarian under the iron-fisted rule of the Chinese Communist Party. With a Freedom House score of just 9 out of 100, China is a place where the government's tentacles of control stretch into every facet of society, stifling dissent and crushing any semblance of political or civil liberties. The government's stranglehold on the media and the internet is particularly alarming, with a censorship score of just 1 out of 100. Hundreds of millions of surveillance cameras monitor the population, and the government's mass detention of ethnic Uyghurs in Xinjiang has been widely condemned as a grave violation of human rights. China's authoritarian model has become increasingly exported to other parts of the world, as the country leverages its economic and geopolitical clout to prop up friendly regimes and undermine democratic values. The erosion of freedom in China has profound implications for the global balance of power and the future of human rights worldwide. Number 4. Eritrea, a country that has been aptly described as the North Korea of Africa. With a Freedom House score of just 2 out of 100, Eritrea is a place where the authoritarian regime of President Isaias Afwerki has created a living hell for its citizens. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly are virtually non-existent in Eritrea. The government maintains a stranglehold on the media, with the country ranking 177th out of 180 on the 2023 Press Freedom Index. Thousands of political prisoners languish in Eritrea's notorious detention centers, subjected to torture and inhumane conditions. The country's system of indefinite national service has become a form of forced labor, with conscripts forced to serve for years on end, often in dire conditions. Eritrea's GDP per capita in 2023 was a mere $600, reflecting the dire economic realities faced by its impoverished population. In a region plagued by conflict and repression, Eritrea stands out as one of the most freedom-unfriendly countries in the world. Number 3. Turkmenistan, a Central Asian nation that has become a textbook example of authoritarian rule. With a Freedom House score of just 2 out of 100, Turkmenistan is a place where the government of President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow exercises an iron grip on power, leaving no room for dissent or independent thought. The country's media landscape is completely controlled by the state, with the government censoring the internet and restricting access to information. Turkmenistan ranks a dismal 177th out of 180 on the 2023 Press Freedom Index, reflecting the regime's intolerance of any form of independent journalism. Economic freedom is also severely limited in Turkmenistan, with an estimated 50% of the population living below the poverty line. The government's tight control over the economy and its refusal to embrace meaningful reforms have left the country in a state of stagnation, with little hope for a better future for its long-suffering citizens. Number 2. North Korea, a country that has long been synonymous with the most repressive and totalitarian regimes in the world. With a Freedom House score of just 3 out of 100, North Korea is a place where the Kim dynasty's grip on power is absolute and unforgiving. The government maintains a stranglehold on all aspects of life, with no tolerance for dissent or independent thought. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly are all but non-existent, with the regime ruthlessly cracking down on any form of opposition. North Korea's GDP per capita in 2023 was a mere $1,700, reflecting the dire economic situation faced by its impoverished population. The country's political prisoners, estimated to number around 120,000, are subjected to horrific conditions and severe punishment, with many facing the threat of execution. North Korea's isolation from the outside world, combined with its repressive policies, have turned it into a modern-day dystopia, a place where the light of freedom has been extinguished. Number 1. Syria, a country that has been ravaged by a brutal civil war that has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions more. With a Freedom House score of just 1 out of 100, Syria is a living hell for its citizens, a place where the authoritarian regime of President Bashar al-Assad has unleashed a campaign of terror and oppression. The ongoing conflict has devastated the country, with over 6.6 million Syrians forced to flee their homes as refugees. The death toll from the war stands at an estimated 500,000 as of 2023, a staggering figure that speaks to the sheer scale of the violence and suffering. The Assad regime's use of chemical weapons against its own people, as well as its systematic torture and arbitrary detention of dissidents, have been widely documented and condemned by the international community. Syria's Human Development Index score of 0.567 in 2023 reflects the dire humanitarian situation in the country, where basic rights and freedoms have been all but obliterated. These 10 countries represent the darkest corners of the globe, where the flame of freedom has been extinguished and replaced by the suffocating grip of authoritarianism. As we look to the future, it is clear that the struggle for human rights and democracy will continue to be one of the defining challenges of our time. Only by standing up to oppression and championing the values of individual liberty can we hope to create a world where all people can live in freedom and dignity.